I've created a new program that we will use to take a look at how we use internal tables in our programs. Now you will already be familiar with the data statement that we use to declare fields. Well, we use exactly the same statement when we want to declare internal tables. Now when we declare internal tables, we have to define the start of the table and the end of the table. So let's have a look how we do this. So we start with the data statement, and then we use the begin of addition, and then we specify the table name. I'm going to use itab01, and you will see itab being used as a temporary table name all throughout SAP programs. itab01, and then we have to have an occurs addition, followed by a numeric. So what this does is the begin of means we are starting the definition of something, and then we specify what we are declaring. So this is going to be an internal table, and I've named it itab01. Now the occurs clause, if I pretty it up, now the occurs clause tells SAP we are declaring an internal table, and we are declaring an internal table with 0 records. So occurs means this table is going to be made up of a number of records, but we are going to define 0 to begin with and then let the table expand as we fill it with data. So I'll key in the rest of our table definition. Now I'll create a field called zsurname. I'm going to make it based on the field that we defined in our zEmployees table. So first of all, we specify the table name, followed by the field name, which I think is surname. I'm just going to save this and use forward navigation just to make sure I'm declaring it right. zEmployees surname. Next, I'm going to declare date of birth. And again, use the like statement. I do like to keep everything lined up as well. This should have been a comma, not full stop. And then what we do is specify the end of our internal table. So here we use end of and then specify the table name again, itab01. And that's it, we've created the structure for an internal table, and we can now write code to fill it with records. Now, as I've mentioned previously, there are two types of declaring tables, the old style where we use header records and the new style where we use a separate work area. Well, just by the fact that we're using this occurs clause, we're telling the system we are going to create an internal table with a header record. Now, just as I've completed this internal table, I'm going to change it because one of the things I did here was name our fields in the internal table starting with the Z. When you start to create internal tables, you may find it useful to always make sure your field names are identical to the field names in other internal tables or tables from the ABAP dictionary. Now the reason I say this is because, well, we've already looked at the move statement, which allows us to move data from one field to another. Well, there is another statement called move corresponding, which we will use a little later on, that is used quite often in ABAP programs. And the reason why we use this move corresponding is, well, I'll give you an example. If you want to move 5 fields from table 1 to 5 fields from table 2, and both tables have the same field names, we can just write one line of code using this move corresponding statement, which will automatically search for any field names that are identical and make sure the data contained in the table 1 fields are moved to the corresponding fields of Table 2. And the good thing is, it doesn't matter if these two different tables have a different structure. And what I mean is the fields can be in a completely different order. The move corresponding works it out. It matches the actual name of the field together. And we will take a look at how we do this a little later on. But for now, just bear it in mind and keep your field names the same. So let's just make sure our code is all complete. Do a check. Yes, everything looks good. So now we've seen how to create an old style table with header records. Let's have a look at how we do the new style. So remember, this is the way you want to define your internal tables moving forward, because it complies with the new style of coding and can be used with ABAP objects, which is now the standard way of writing new programs, and you will see lots of ABAP objects code when you dip into standard SAP programs. Now, just so you know, we are not going to dip into ABAP objects programming right now. We're just going to concentrate on how to declare internal tables and structures using object-oriented techniques, because you will see this being used in the majority of programs, whether they are object-oriented programs or not. Now, for those that don't know, the whole thing about object-oriented programming is that we want to keep each part of our program separate from other parts, which allows you and others to reuse all these individual objects throughout your program and in other programs. So in our case, when we create an internal table, we need to separate out the individual data objects, sort of like tiny building blocks. We can then put these building blocks together to create any type of object we want. So put another way, we're making use of modularization and reusability of data objects to enable us to create new data objects later on down the line. Okay, let's have a look at this code. Now, first off, we have to define what is called a line type. And at first glance, when you look at what we're going to do now, you may think this is an awful lot more work than defining a table using the old syntax. But don't worry, it's quite simple, and you will quickly see the benefit of using this when you are dealing with larger, more complex programs by being able to reuse your code. So we start off with using the types statement. And think of this as we're declaring new data types. So just as we have integers, character strings, well, we're using types to declare a new data type. In our case, we're creating structures of existing data types. So back to the code, types, and then you should be familiar with begin of, and then we specify our own name to identify this line type. So I'm going to use line01, and we'll put underscore typ on the end. Then I'm going to copy and paste. Our two fields, exactly the same. And then I will use end of. Line 01 underscore typ. So it looks very similar to the old style. Let's add a comment in here. In this statement, we declared a table, so that consists of a line, and also saying to the system, we're going to store multiple lines in a table. Well, here we're just defining the structure of one line. this does not define the internal table yet. We will come on to that. Now the first thing you'll notice is that instead of using the data statement, we're using the type statement. And of course, there's no occurs addition, because we're not defining an internal table at this point. We are just defining a line of a table. We then declare our surname and date of birth fields, as we did with the old syntax. And just as with the data statement, we use the colon to tell the system we are going to chain statements together, so we don't have to retype the word types all the time. And the last line, we're saying this is the end of our line by using the end of. Now once we have defined our line, the next step is to define our table type. Now again, we're not quite at the point of creating the table yet. We're going to say we're going to create a type of table. So we're just defining the structure of it. And again, we do this with the type statement. Then we declare our internal table. So just as we did up here, I will declare an internal table down here. And I'm going to call this itab 02. But don't forget, this is a type that we're doing. So I'm sticking the underscore typ on the end. Then I add type standard table of, and then I specify the line type. Line 01 underscore typ. Now again, as I mentioned, we've used the type statement instead of the data statement. We give our new type the name, itab02 underscore typ, and then we follow this with the word type to indicate we're going to define our table based on a type that already exists, which is this one. Then we include the term standard table of to indicate we are going to create a standard table type. Now remember, a standard table can have multiple identical records, meaning we have no unique key. So that means we don't have to include any unique key in this table type definition. We just need to declare it just as we did. Also in the old statement, we use the occurs clause up here to define the initial size of our table, and we use 0, which meant really we don't know how big the table is going to be, so just leave it up to the system to determine it. But in this new style, using the types, instead of using the occurs clause, we can add initial size, and then we can give it a number. So it could be 0. But this is completely optional. And if you don't know the exact size of the table you are creating, you can just leave this off. And actually, you very rarely see this in programs. So just leave your statement like this. And lastly, let's also consider how we can create a sorted table type instead of a standard table type. Now, before moving on from this statement, let's also consider how we can create a sorted table type instead of a standard table type. Well, we can do this by, I'll tell you what, I'll just copy this line so you can see the difference. So where we have our type defined, we just go past the type statement, and here we can have sorted table of line 01 underscore type, and then we specify our table key. So because our table is made up of surname and date of birth, we can then say with unique key, and then we can add a key. So we can put surname. It's just gone on to 2 lines, so let's put this like this. So you can see it's very similar, but we're saying, with the proper words, we're creating a sorted table instead of a standard table. And because we're going to create a sorted table, we need to say what we're going to sort the table by. So we're going to say we've got a unique key and we're using the field surname, which is part of our line type. Sorry, which is this one there. Now this is just an example because we know that the table we created and the records we have in there, we actually have duplicate records based on surname. So later on, when we create a sorted table, we will specify a unique key where we will use more than one field that defines the unique record. And just to show you how you can do that now, all you need to do is list the fields at the end of the statement separated by a comma. So because our table only exists in 2 fields, in this case I will just say comma DOB. Okay, next up, remember we have still only declared types at this point. So next we want to declare the table itself. So as the comment says, we're going to declare our table based on our table type that we just declared up there. Let's make it so it works, so we'll just comment out the sorted table. So up to now we have defined the line type and then we've defined the table type that is based on the line type. But all these are just type definitions. We've just created the blueprints to make up a table. We do not have an internal table yet. So how do we do this? Well, let's have a look at the code. And it's really, really simple. We use the data statement again. And then we declare now our internal table name. Followed by type. And then we specify, tell you what, let's change this. And then we specify the type our table is going to be based on. So because we've already defined our line type and our table type, all we need to do now is use the data statement to say we're going to create a new table called itab02 that is based on the table type we declared itab02 underscore typ. And when declaring internal tables this way, we have the option of whether to use a header line or not. If you do want to use a header line, you must specify this explicitly in the data statement. So it would read, let's have a look, data type, and then you would say with header line. But remember, I'm saying don't do this, because if you do, you'll not be able to use this style of table in ABAP objects. So the next thing to do, let's get rid of it. Now, we're not done quite yet. The last thing we need to do is define our work area. And we will use this work area in conjunction with the table we've just defined. Now, before we put the code in, just note that the work area is actually not part of the internal table. We have actually declared the complete internal table now in the previous step. But we declare our work area to work in conjunction with the table, meaning we move data to our work area, we work with it, and then we update our table from the work area. Or we read data from our table into our work area to allow us to work with it. The work area is completely separate. And because it is separate, if we have multiple internal tables with the same structure, we can also use one work area to read and write data to and from multiple tables. And that's an example of reusing your code. So let's have a look how we define the work area. So once again, we use the data statement. And I'm just going to call this now WA, stands for work area. And it's going to be a work area that we're going to associate with ITAB 02. Now, the association is just in my mind, it's not anything in the system. So it's just, you know, a mental association. So I'm just going to say WA underscore ITAB 02, just so I know what work area matches what internal table. Then we use the word type, and then we have to specify the line type. Well, we've already declared it up here. So we can just copy and paste and bring it down. And that's it. That's how we declare our work area. Use a data statement, we give our work area a name, and we specify the type as the line type we already declared. And that completes everything we need to work with our internal table now. Now I know the first statement of declaring an internal table with a header line was only 4 lines of code, and we had to actually use 7 lines of code to use the new style of internal table. But believe me, it is much better to code this way. And just as an example, if we want to create a brand new internal table on the same structure, well, all we need to do is this. ITAB 03 using the 02 line type. And it can go on and on. We can create 10 internal tables, all based on the same line type. So that's how we can reuse our code.